name's Mark. Vancouver, Canada, planted a church there 8 years ago now, and it started out 16 people in my house, and now it's about 5,000 or 6,000 people across 4 sites in 2 provinces. And the reason for that is because we said we wanted to try to reach skeptics. And so you're in John 20, open up your Bibles to John 20. There we see a skeptic. We see that this church started with skepticism. So if you're a skeptic, if you're watching online, or you're here and you're a skeptic, man, this is a good person that we meet in John chapter 20. It's, of course, the resurrection story. Jesus has just died in John 19, and next week is the last week of your John series. But here we see that the foundations of the church actually started with the skeptic. So you're in good hands if you're a skeptic. I'm a skeptic. I grew up that way, and we started a church to try to reach people like me, and people started meeting Jesus in the most unlikely place, Vancouver, Canada, very post-Christian. We're probably a generation or 2 ahead of you in America in regard to secularization, sociologists say. So in a sense, I come to you from the future, all right? And I tell you, this is where you're going, all right? So, it's a sense of encouragement because Jesus still is saving people. All right, in a post-Christian culture where people, in my culture, it's like in Vancouver's the kind of place where everyone thinks they're connected to the universe because they wear Lululemon pants, eat kale, and carry a water bottle, and they think, oh my gosh, I know the universe, and it saved me. It's like, so I planted a church to tell them that they were all fools, and that actually their life's a disaster, they're narcissistic, selfish, you're not allowed to choose your own religion or build your own worldview out of nothing if it doesn't make any sense. But Jesus has a better way. And so we started a church like that. And in Canada, you're really not supposed to talk to people like that, all right? Because, Canada, we're like neutral, and we're the nicest people on the planet. And so what you're supposed to do is start a church, and you're supposed to kind of talk in like pear-shaped tones and be like, hey, you have ideas, and they're really good, and I have ideas, and we're all just sharing ideas, and sorry. You're supposed to kind of function like that. And I was like, oh, what a boring church to start. So I just started screaming at people for an hour and telling them that they're a disaster, but Jesus isn't. And they started showing up and going, oh my gosh, this is so offensive. I'm gonna go invite my friend, all right? And then their friend would meet Jesus, and then people started getting baptized. And even in post-Christian Canada, people are hungry. We just did something called Church in the Park, where we gather our whole church in a park, and we're creative, so we came up with that name. So we gathered them in a park, and we told them about Jesus, and there's all these people walking by, and this one guy is sitting there with a fishing rod, and he's in the pond, and one of our people walked up, they go, hey, what are you doing there? He's like, I'm just fishing. They're like, what, have you caught anything? He's like, no, actually, there's no fish in this pond. I just wanted to come and hear what they had to say about God, right? The guy brings his fishing rod. There's no fish in there. It's like, hey, what's up? And so the reality is, don't tell me that people aren't actually hungry. They want to pursue this. And here we find Mary, foundational in faith. And look at the story, John 20. I'm just going to kind of pick up a few of the things. And then if you're at the Apologetics Conference, I'm going to kind of overlap some of my thoughts and ideas and arguments from the Apologetics Conference and share with you a bit of my story and a bunch of stuff that I talk about in the book as well, and share that with you out of this story, because we find a skeptic here. John 20, verse 1. On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. That's John. He's trying to be humble. And said to them, he's like, I'm writing a book and Jesus loves me more than everybody, but I won't tell you who I am. And then said to them, and look at this phrase, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb and we do not know where they have laid him. So the reality is she comes at this thing as a skeptic, even though Jesus had said, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna rise again. She gets to the tomb, he's not there, and she goes immediately, she does not walk up to the guards and say, he is risen indeed, let's start Easter. What she says is, someone stole him, he's gone, where is he? Skeptic. Like some of you, I share in the introduction of the book, that was my upbringing. Never walked to a church till I was 19. My family, my father was so ardently atheistic, he named my brother Matthew, but said my mom couldn't spell his name with 2 T's because that would be biblical. So spelt his name with 1 T. 4 years later, they had me and they named me Mark. So clearly he had no clue what the New Testament's about, all right? It's like we got a whole gospel family if I had a couple brothers. It's like Luke, I think Luke's an awesome name. Let's go with that. He's never opened up a New Testament in his life. He doesn't even understand the irony. And so that's the world I grew up in. I didn't walk to church at 19, became a Christian when I was 17, 18. Guy told me about Jesus in woodworking class, and I started to investigate because I'm an evidential thinker like Mary. If you're a skeptic and you're here, find yourself in Mary. She does not just come to the tomb and deduce a whole bunch of theological things. Her immediate idea is someone has stolen the body. I'm a skeptic. I don't know what happened. So what does God do? He does what God does when he wants to convince people. Verse 12, she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the other. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Listen, when God wants to convince people that something is supernatural, he sends angels. And every time angels show up, what's the first thing an angel says to people? Do not be afraid, every single time, right? Which means they must be crazy. It must be, when angels show up, nobody goes, "Oh, I don't know." All right, they're like 24 feet tall with a six-pack and 4 eyeballs. I don't know what they look like, but every time they're like, "Stop freaking out. It's okay. It's how he made us." All right, just everyone chill. That's the first thing out of every angel's mouth. And not everybody who sees one goes, "Oh my goodness, what they're saying is legit." And they run off and do whatever. This angel shows up and goes, "Mary, do not be afraid, blah, blah, blah. And woman, why are you weeping?" And then she says to him, "They have taken away my Lord." What? So she doubts when she gets to the tomb. Then an angel shows up and she doubts the angel, all right? This woman is a skeptic. She's tough. She's like me. I needed evidence and still need evidence to believe anything anybody tells me. That's how I grew up. It's who I am. It's who I've always been. I got a 12-year-old daughter now, and I'm working through, I don't know if some of you, you've kind of gone through this, but she now wants to kind of, go out without me. And I don't like that because I want to watch her because I'm an evidential thinker. And you say you're going out with your friends to do something. I don't believe it unless I see with my own eyes. Anybody else like that? All right, that's what I do. So literally the first time she was allowed out of my sight without me and Aaron around was a few weeks ago. She said, "Me and my 2 friends, we're going to go out. We're going to take a walk. We're going to go to the store." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." And so I said, "Honey, I think I should follow them." All right. And my wife's like, "You can't follow our daughter. If she found out that you followed her, this would be really bad. She would feel totally offended." I'm like, yeah, I know, but I still think I should follow her. And she's like, "Mark, that would be terrible." And she's like, "But we do have to order some pizza, so maybe you should go get that." And I'm like, "Yes, I will go get that and I will follow her." And she's like, "No, you should not do that. That'd be really wrong if she ever found out. I can't believe you even said that." And I said, "Okay, so you're gonna order the pizza, then I'm gonna go." She goes, "No, you go now. You go early. You go wait for it." I'm like, okay, so I shouldn't follow her. Do not follow her. Okay, so but you want me to go? Yes, of course, go now. Okay, so just blink twice if you want me to follow her, all right? And she's like, "Mark, you should not, if she found out, she'd be devastated. You should not follow her." I'm like, "Okay, well, I don't believe you." All right. So I actually followed her, all right? I'm like following her around, looked like a creep. She'd be in a big white van with a black round window. It's like, "Hey, little girls." All right, so anyway, I watched her from the pizza joint as she walked around the corner with her friends, and the pizza guy's like, "Hey, your pizza's here." I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm not here for that, all right? That's just who I am. I've always been, unless I see it, I don't believe it. And so people started telling me about Jesus pretty early on in my life, and I was like, I don't know. And so I started exploring Christianity myself, like some of you, like some of the skeptics, and you might be here. Just because you're sitting in church doesn't mean you actually believe any of this. And so you might find yourself in her. She's a skeptic just like you. Angels show up and she still doesn't believe. So then God goes, "Okay, one last thing I'll do. There's one way to convince everybody. We'll just send Jesus in. And once Jesus shows up, everything should be taken care of." So, verse 14, having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing. Verse 15, Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She spent 3 years with this guy. "Why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" And he's kind of like just playing with it, like, "Okay, here I am." All right. And then, supposing him to be the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, you tell me where you've laid him." She's still a skeptic, all right? So God's like, tomb, skeptic, angel, skeptic. Okay, Jesus, I don't know, all right? This is literally an adventure in missing the point. This is my daughter. We went to Disneyland last year, and she goes, Dad, I want to go on this roller coaster. And I said, honey, I don't know if you've done this as parents. I want to show my daughter what it's like to be a sacrificial parent. So I'm like, I will go stand at the roller coaster for you in line for 2.5 hours. You can go hang out in Disneyland, and I'll text you when you're ready. Oh, Daddy, thank you. I go and sit in line 2.5 hours. She shows up, and I'm like, honey, this is exactly what you're going to do as a parent. That's what I wanted to convey to her. This is exactly what you'll do for your kids one day. You will sacrifice for 2.5 hours for your kids. And she looks at me and she goes, no, my husband will. I'm like, what the crap? How young do you women learn this stuff, all right? Like, what? Marry some fool. She's 12 years old. She's already got it. Adventure and missing the point, all right? You're missing the point. So this is Mary, literally. It's the skeptic. She's missing the point. Jesus is trying to say everything about your life needs to now be defined by this reality, the reality of the resurrection, that Christianity, here's what you have to understand, it's not a philosophy. It's not a religion. It's not a group of ideas. It's based on a historical moment called the resurrection, that if it can be proven false, Christianity's over. Go home. It's done. It's not a set of teachings. It's not an idea about how to get enlightened or connect into the all soul of the universe. It's not religion. It's not about being a good person. It's not about performing for God. This whole story is about the fact that God performed for you. And now the question is, what are you going to do with that? And when I was presented with that as a skeptic growing up, I was like, I don't really even know what to do with this. So I started actually pursuing it. I started wondering, what would this actually look like in my life at all? But I was a skeptic. I wasn't going to believe easy. So I started exploring it evidentially, philosophically, psychologically, historically, literarily. And what I found is that Christianity holds up among the marketplace of ideas the best. It not only is historically true, but it gives you meaning in life in a way that nothing else does. As a kid, my dad died when I was 15 years old, and I'm standing over his casket asking the big questions of life. What is this about? Why does this feel off? And I began exploring morality, and I began exploring the evidences for the existence of God, which some of you're doubters, you're skeptics, whatever. I started pursuing, why do I know, for instance, the difference between right and wrong? Why do I have a moral law? As Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, said, there's two great evidences for the existence of God: the starry hosts above and the moral law within. The idea that you have an objective moral law that tells you that rape is wrong and murder is wrong, these things, where did that come from? The classic explanation, and if you doubt that you have a moral law, just watch your kids, right? Kids have moral laws at every moment. Kids are just moral creatures. That's what they are. They just, like, I took my daughter to the aquarium. I was telling the apologetics conference on the other night in Vancouver, and she wanted to buy a stuffy, and so I gave her $5. She's like, no, that kid over there has $10. Don't you know we should all have the same? She said, like my government. We should all have the same, all right? Everybody should be equal. We should all have the same amount of money. And my kid's freaking out, saying, hey, listen, everybody, where does she get this sense of justice? Where does it come from? Why do you know the difference between right and wrong? And when I started exploring that and understanding that there are objective moral values, I started sharing that with my friends. And I went from sitting in a garage on a Friday night at my buddy's house, smoking weed, talking about ideas. Then I became a Christian. Then I explored all these things. And 3 weeks later, I was back in that same garage having to defend Christianity against them. 30 people lined up, hitting me with questions. I was still high because we had the garage door closed, but now I was Christian high. So I'm having to defend these ideas and say, listen, the evidence actually is this. And one of the ideas was the moral law. The fact that you know the difference between right and wrong. And the pushback on those nights was, no. Moral laws are constructed socially, and we should not project whatever Canadian, we might in Canada think this is a value, but it's not that every culture should actually believe those things. And that started to fall. I was working at Michael's Arts and Crafts store. Some of you guys know what that is. You have that around here. I drove around the corner. I used to had a red apron. All right, made $6.85 an hour through college. It was just cigarette money. And And I worked there, and I remember debating this guy, and I was like, man, I've become a Christian. I realized that objective moral values exist. He's like, no, they're not. That's just socially constructed, and we should never project our values into other people or other cultures. That's just what we believe. And I said, wait, that doesn't make any sense. I said, what if we traveled to some jungle somewhere, and instead of love your neighbor, their value was eat them? And we went there, and they took your sister, and she came with us, and they put her on a spit, and they fired her up, and they ate her. You couldn't say they'd done something decisively wrong. All you could say is they'd done something that you and your culture doesn't like. And he goes, oh, I see where you're going with this. And he said, actually, you're right. I couldn't say they'd done something decisively wrong. All that I can say is our culture thinks that, but I don't want to project it on them. Now, if anybody tells you that morals are relative, just chop them in the throat really hard. And then when they say, why did you do that? Say, don't project your values on me, bro. That's like coffee to me in the morning. Because the reality is, you don't get to tell me how to act. You don't get to tell me unless objective moral values exist. Then how you feel. Now, what they also push back and they go, okay, well, maybe they're not relative, but so where do we get them? We got them through hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary development, and our brains got coded with particular animalistic social values, and that's how we survive in the universe. But that can't be true, because you and I know that a lot of our values transcend animalistic instinct. Animals, and that would never happen unless we got a transcendent being to give us values that transcend the animal kingdom. The animal kingdom is brutal. It's red in tooth and claw, man. It doesn't matter. Listen, in the animal kingdom, have you ever watched the Nature Network? That stuff's brutal. All right, a zebra doesn't murder, a lion doesn't murder a zebra, a lion kills no one goes, oh, I can't believe that lion, he murdered him. And self-reflection, that's not a thing. You know, a praying mantis, the female praying mantis, after she's done having sex with her husband, rips his head off. She's done with him. All right, some of you are like, that's a good idea, actually. Kind of done with them after you had the kids. So, but we don't adopt that value. We don't put that in. We're not encoded to think that way. Somewhere along the line, you decided that ripping someone's head off was wrong. Where did you get it? It can't come from nature. And if all you are, animals are just instinct alone, but somehow you transcend instinct. Somehow your moral values transcend the realities of the animal kingdom. And the question for you is, it's because they came down from something that actually transcends nature. That's when I began going, my goodness, this is an evidence. I'm not saying it's a proof for God, but it's an evidence that maybe it's logical to believe in something that's above my experiential reality. And then I started exploring the other thing Immanuel Kant talks about, which is the starry hosts above, and astronomy and astrology and astrophysics and science. And I started realizing that since the time of Aristotle, since the time of Socrates and Plato and Aquinas, everybody agreed that if something begins to exist, it has to have a cause, right? It's called causality or contingency. If something begins to exist, it has to have a cause. Everybody believed that. You began to exist. You have a birthday, right? The reason you exist is because you have parents, all right, that met each other one night and the mood was right and the candles were set and now you exist, all right? I won't get into the details. Some of you are like, all right, thinking about it. But the reality is you exist because you began to exist. The reason you began to exist is because something outside of you existed before you and decided to actually have you. Now, the reality is, everybody would just say, well, what's the non-caused, eternal, infinite thing? And everybody would just say it was the universe. The universe has been around forever. There's no need for God because the universe is eternal. It's the infinite thing. It has no cause. Until 1929, when Edwin Hubble looked through his telescope and saw that all the planets were moving apart. All time, energy, matter, space came into existence 15 billion years ago in a moment. He rewound it back and said, the universe has a birthday. Well, if the universe began to exist, now the universe has to have a cause. Whatever begins to exist has to have a cause. The universe began to exist. Now the universe has to have a cause. Genesis 1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He transcends the very thing he made. And so now I tell you all that because what I began to realize is it was rational and reasonable to believe in Christianity. It wasn't for dumb people. And that was important to me because I was a thinker and I was an evidentialist and I was like Mary, I was a skeptic. And some of you are exactly like that. And the problem is in our culture, the way Christianity is posited is it's for dumb people. It's for people who need a crutch in life. And the reality is you turn on the news and the debate is usually a split screen and it's a really smart person over here arguing for atheism and agnosticism and simply evolutionary biology, and it's got an English accent and it's like, hello, I'm for Oxford and I'm gonna debate you now. And this is Richard Dawkins and he's a PhD and he's going to represent atheism. And debating him today will be Joe. Joe's a Christian who lives in a swamp and thinks Oprah's the Antichrist. And you're like, no, not Joe, right? And it's just like, yeah, you should believe because if you don't, it's like, no, that's not an argument. I don't know what that means. But the reality is, you begin realizing that Christianity actually makes sense. At least theism begins to make sense and to say, you know what, I'm actually trying to follow the evidence. I'm trying to run the ramp of reason before taking the leap of faith. But when you have a worldview, you've got to think about, is it actually the most rational, reasonable worldview according to the evidence, according to philosophy, according to experience, according to worldview questions? And I began exploring that and saying, you know what, it actually makes sense. It makes sense. I started reading the Bible as a 19-year-old kid because I was like, well, the foundation of this thing has to be the Bible. If the Bible's not legit, and what I began to realize as I read scholars is even the most secular scholars were like, man, the New Testament is the most trusted document in antiquity. It has so many manuscripts compared to other things that we trust and read. The timeline for the writing of the New Testament is so short. Most books in antiquity were written hundreds of years after the fact, claiming things happened, and myth and all kinds of legend can get in there. The New Testament, Paul's letters were written 25 to 30 years after. The Gospels were written maybe 30, 40, 50 years after, which in the scope of history is very short. And I began realizing people legitimately, and then I started reading the content of the Gospels, and I started going, there's something legit about this content. And the reason the most secular people look at the New Testament and go, there's something legitimate about it, is because if you were starting a religion, you would never write the New Testament the way that it's written. You would never write the stories of Jesus. You would whitewash them. You would change them. I started reading them, and I'm like, these are weird stories. Take this stuff out. Right, even this story right here, don't put a woman as the first person to arrive at the empty tomb, because in that culture, women weren't even listened to in a court of law. Right, don't make a woman the first one who arrives at the empty tomb the most important historical moment. Make it some religious guy who's respected. Just put him in the story. Oh, I see, the tomb is empty. We shall begin religion now. You know, whatever. Like that's what you do. Don't put a woman in there who nobody trusts. But the story's going, this is just what happened. We're just being honest. When I was reading the Gospels and they would say things, Jesus would walk along and they'd go, hey, Jesus, you're God, right? And he'd be like, yes, I am fully God. And they go, okay, I have a question. When are you coming back? I don't know. What? What do you mean? Only the Father knows. What? Don't put that story in there. That's going to confuse everybody 2,000 years from now. So you're God, right? 100% God. I'm omniscient. I know all things. So when are you coming back? No idea. What? No, don't do that. Because then when my friends read it, they're going to go, look. Or he walks into a village and the text says he could not heal people in that village. Couldn't? What do you mean couldn't? So you're God. Yep, I made everything. I could float that mountain right now. I could turn your face inside out if I want. I could do anything I want. Okay, but what about that village? Can't do it. Hands are tied. What? No. Don't put that in there. Don't put the one that we're all supposed to follow, the hero of the story, crying in a garden, sweating, blood because he's so nervous, asking the Father to take this cup and this mission from me because I don't want to do it anymore. Don't make our hero look like that. Make him look strong. Make him like Braveheart, just riding in on the horse with the face paint. It's like, what's up, Jerusalem? Let's go, all right? Make that our hero. Don't make him talk to himself on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Aren't you God? Yep. Why are you talking to yourself? Don't put these stories in there. And scholars look at the New Testament and they go, this is why it's actually legitimate. Because something about these stories actually rings true. Something about these stories. And now there's people who push back against most of this, even the Easter stories themselves. And they say, no, you can't trust these stories. I mean, Jesus rose from the dead, and sure, there's an empty tomb, and no one's been able to find the body. But there's all kinds of theories, and if you're a skeptic and you're here, you probably have them. There's all kinds of theories. I used to watch these when I was growing up because I was interested, and I would turn on the Discovery Channel, and there'd be official theories about what actually happened, because it's very hard to explain the rise of the early church. It's very hard to explain why a group of Jews, very adamant religious Jews, all of a sudden overnight changed their day of worship and started worshiping a human being who they said wrote. It's very hard to explain that. And I don't know if you know this, religious people tend not to change very quick. All right, I'm gonna ask you an example of this. How many of you, if you're honest, just raise your hand. We can be honest here, we're family. I don't know you, but you guys are family. Raise your hand if you're sitting in the same seat today as you were last week. It's just such religious people. Just you do the same thing every week, man. I do something in my church for 4 weeks, and my church is like, this is the way we've always done it. It's like, no, it's not. We've done it for 4 weeks. It's very hard to change the minds and the patterns and the rhythms of religious people, is it not? Now you take something thousands of years old, and overnight, all of a sudden, they change their day of worship, they change who they worship, and they're willing to die for it. Recognize that. Because of the resurrection, these guys all got slaughtered. Because they're blaspheming. They're worshiping a person now. And so they get stoned to death. They get pulled apart by lions. And I remember when I was becoming a new, I would read this. I would sit out on the rock in front of my high school, smoke a pack of cigarettes, and read the New Testament. And I'd be like, my gosh, these people are unreal. And finally, when someone dragged me to church, I thought I was gonna come to church and it was gonna be just like the New Testament, like raw, real, skeptics, death, like sacrifice. It was gonna be crazy. And I walked in and it was safe for the whole family, man. It was like worship slides with birds sucking pollen out of flowers and like I thought I was gonna walk into church and it was gonna be like, sit down, shut up, we don't know if we're gonna survive. And the worship slides that have blood stains on them and just be like, rise, lions. All right, I thought it was gonna be crazy. Like I didn't know if I was gonna survive. And then it was like, hey, greet your neighbor. And I'm like, I don't wanna touch anyone. I'm a 19-year-old skeptic. Please don't make me grab their hand. Grab hands across the aisle. No, God, no. The skepticism, the rawness, the realness, the reality of Christianity says to you, listen, this is not safe. You have got to be willing to give up your money, your high school years, your sex life, your family life. Take all of that and orient it around this fact being true. This is anything but safe. So do you? Or do you hedge your bets in comfort and go, it's really good for them. I mean, it was really tough persecution, I get it. But persecution to us, we don't even know it. These people died for this. That's what this was. This wasn't a nice, there's skeptics out there who say, you know, the resurrection, that was just in their hearts. It wasn't actually a historical fact because we know people don't rise from the dead, right? That's a mirror. Now, the closest I ever came to seeing anyone rise from the dead, I told you this story last time I was here speaking in the summer, is the time I told a woman that her husband was dead and I had the wrong guy. All right, that's the closest I've been to. She passed out in my arms in a room and I ministered to her for 45 minutes before I realized I had the wrong husband. Anyway, not my finest pastoral moment. So she's like in the room like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, it's okay, I'm going to see him again at the resurrection. I'm like, actually, you're going to see him sooner than that. Because I had the wrong guy, I'm really sorry. Like, that's the closest, he went on to live, 8 months. That's the closest I've seen. That's the closest I've seen to resurrection in my life, all right? That reality. So there's people who come up with all kinds of theories. The resurrection didn't really happen. Jesus the official Discovery Channel version is that this didn't happen. What really happened, and of course Islam says this as well, that Jesus just went up on a cross and he kind of swooned. He passed out because of the torture and the dehydration, and he kind of passed out. And then the Roman Empire kind of looked and went, oh, he's dead. Let's take him down. We'll throw him over here. And then he healed up. And then he started walking around telling everybody, this is the official Discovery Channel stuff, right? That's what I used to watch and go, oh, that's an interesting theory. Because I know men, and if men stub their toe, they're out for a week. You ever seen the man cold? All right, the man cold's a real thing. I don't think Jesus gets beaten within an inch of his life, gets a spear shoved up his rib cage into his heart sac, and then just starts walking around a couple days later. Hey, everybody, I know, it looks bad. We're cool, all right? I don't think that's a thing. And I remember reading it going, if the Roman Empire knew how to do one thing, it was kill people. They killed 6,000 people on a single day on crucifixes, right? They didn't tend to take guys down and throw them in a pile, and a couple days later, guys like, whew, that was close. I am risen, believe. That's a ridiculous theory. But we've had to come up with them because nothing explains what these guys died for. Nothing explains the rise of the early church. Nothing explains the empty tomb. If they went to the wrong tomb, which is what some people say, just all the Roman Empire needs to do is just bring out the body of Jesus and go, look, you all went to the wrong tomb. It's over. The resurgence is over, the revival is over, any kind of difficulty politically is over, because that's what they were nervous about. That's why they had soldiers waiting. All you need to do is show the body. That's it. It's never been found. They find the bones of Jesus. Christianity's over. I heard a story where there was a debate in a church one time where the whole church came together and there was some people angry that there were drums in church, and so they were arguing about it, and a man stood up in the audience and said, Jesus Christ is rolling over in his grave right now because there's drums in our church. It's like, you got bigger problems if Jesus Christ is rolling over in his grave right now, bro. Like Christianity ain't true and we should all go home. But the grave is empty. And Mary was a skeptic and she comes to believe it and give her life for it. And so I went through all these evidences in my life and tried to figure out how to make sense of all of this. And then I would stand in the garage with my friends and tell them about this, and they would say, okay, fine, you believe that. But here's the best route forward for us socially. Let's just everybody say that everyone has their own way. And everybody's way is right. Everybody's way is just their way leading to the same end, the same path, different paths to the same place. It's the issue of exclusivity. We don't like that, especially in Canada. We don't like the idea that one person's ideas would by default make another person's ideas false. But of course, that's the foundation of Christianity, because if the tomb is empty, then every other way, including Christian religion, is wrong. Because you can be born in the church, serve in the church, get married in the church, die in the church, have your funeral in the church, and still wake up in hell. Because you don't know him. In the dark, I'm talking about when no one is looking. Do you know him and delight in him? I'm not talking about just believing the tomb is empty. I'm talking about loving it. Yes. I'm talking about, look, Satan believes the tomb is empty. It's not salvific for him. He doesn't delight in it. He doesn't apply it to himself. And by default, that means every other system is false. Well, people don't like that idea because it means exclusivity, but that's math. We want to be logical. Remember, we're getting interviewed and we're facing a really smart person on news, and we got to be evidential. We got to be logical. But we don't want to do that. I went golfing with a guy recently. We're out there. He started to get really jacked up that I was a Christian and angry. And he was like, why are you a Christian? Why do you believe that only Jesus is the only way? And I'm like, well, it makes logical sense. If Jesus is the only way, then no other way. No, we all just believe the same thing. I said, okay, hold on a sec. But all of these ways contradict each other, right? Atheism and Buddhism says there's no God. Hinduism says there's a pantheon of hundreds of millions of gods. Christianity says there's one God in three persons. We can all be wrong, but we can't all be right at the same time. I said, that's basic math. He said, no, I don't like that because it causes, division. I said, yeah, but that doesn't matter. That's an issue over here. I'm just talking about what's true right now, not how it feels, but what's true. And I said, for instance, if your daughter came home from school and said she was on a math test and she wrote down 2 + 2 and she wrote down 5. I said, you're a math guy. He was an accountant. I said, you're a math guy. What would you say about that? What if she came home and said, 2 + 2 = 5? Dad, I can't believe they marked it wrong on my test. How dare they project their values on me? I believe 2 + 2 is 5. And he actually said this, then that's what's true for her, then I'd let her believe it. Come on. Wow. What are we talking about right now? We are willing to sacrifice truth for the comfort of a Thanksgiving dinner at this point, and we're worse off for it. Just because something makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean you shouldn't try to figure out whether it's true, right? Because sometimes feelings are a really bad way to live your life. Right? I do marriages as a pastor, and I got sick of watching these people. They'd get up there, and these two kids, right, would write to the pastor, can we write our own vows? I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. All right? All right, they've known each other for 18 months. Oh, Tracy, I love you. Oh, David, I love you. Really? That's a surprise to everybody here today, that you love each other. Oh, you're blowing our minds right now, that you love each other on day one. Wow, fascinating. Because here's what I want to know. I don't want to know how you feel right now about David. Or David, how you feel about Tracy with your little poem. T, you're trustworthy. R, responsible. And I would sit up there just trying not to gag. Why? Because I don't care how you feel right now. Here's what I care about. Fast forward 10 years. Amen. 3 kids, a lot of jogging pants and cereal in the hair. You haven't been touched in a month. You go to the grocery store in aisle 4, there's a woman. She has makeup on. She's batting her little eyelashes at you, giving you the vibe Tracy used to give you. No jogging pants, real pants on. Feels good, doesn't it? I looked at this guy, he did not move his head. He's like, that was a trap, sorry. Do not trust how you feel, because how you feel can destroy your life. Amen. You follow how you feel in aisle 4, you are dead, man. Amen. The resurrection pushes back and goes, I'm not asking you how you feel about truth. I'm asking you to realign how you feel around it. Submit yourself to something bigger than yourself. You want to know how powerful he is? You want to know how good he is? All the evidential thinking in the world, here's how good he is. I'll leave you with this and I'll pray for you. 2 weeks after I told that woman about her husband, pastor walks into my office. He goes, hey, you should go visit her at her house. I'm like, what? I've never visited a woman at her house. What are you talking about? He's like, I don't know. I was just sitting in my office. I was just praying and just thinking that maybe you should go visit her. I'm like, okay, I'll go in a week or two. And he's like, no, I'm just feeling like maybe you should go today. I'm like, okay. So I show up at her house. There's a car in the driveway, and I knock on the door. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, nothing. 10 minutes, 15 minutes go by, and I just stand there. I'm like, I know she's here. Knock, knock, knock. Finally, she opens the door. This 65, 7-year-old woman, and she's wearing her pajamas. Opens the door, what do you want? I'm like, hey. I'm sorry. Can I come in? She's like, yeah. So I come into her house, we sit down on her couch, and we start to chat. After about 3 hours, we become buds. We're talking theology and philosophy and our stories, and her story is amazing. 3.5 hours go by, tea, give her a hug before I leave. I get to the front door, and I turn around. I said, thank you for having me. She says, do you know why I'm wearing my pajamas right now? No. She said, I came down the stairs today. I've been so distraught over the last 3 weeks, 2-3 weeks, over what happened, that I walked into my kitchen and I said, Lord, I'm going to take my own life today. Unless you send someone to my front door to encourage me. And I fell asleep in a chair in the living room, and I woke up to the sound of you knocking on the door. That's how good he is. That's how powerful he is. You are so small. He will work before you even thought about it. And the question is, do you be obedient to that? Do you respond to that? Do you orient your time and your life and your mind and your worldview around that, or kick against it? And the reality is this, as I meet with people over and over and over and lay out the evidences for Christianity and why they should believe the tomb is empty and orient their life around it, those who don't believe, and if you're here and you say, I don't believe in Christianity, and I talk to my church about this all the time. On Easter, when people show up and we talk about this story, my church doubles in size almost, right? People show up at Easter. They'll just show up because they want to go over to grandma's after and eat ham and put on their nice pants. And so everybody just, puts the joint down. All right, I'll go. All right, and they show up. And most churches are just happy to have them, and they'll do anything they want to wow them, right? I'm so glad you're in our church. We hope you come back and check out all the we hope. Fly in a helicopter. Look at, wow. So I do the opposite. I make fun of them. How are you here right now? Why would you be here right now? If you don't come here next week and you weren't here last week, what does that mean? It means you look at the empty tomb and you think it's a nice idea. But the one thing Christianity is not nice. Either you should be picketing my church right now out front because I'm spreading falsehood and I'm brainwashing people in a mythology that never happened, or you should give your life to Jesus right now. Amen. And here's why you won't. It's not because you're smart. It's not because philosophically you think the Kantian way is better than a theistic way. It's because you're a coward. It's because you're afraid of what your coworkers are going to say when you come to Jesus and you come to work and now you've oriented your whole life around Jesus. You're afraid of what your girlfriend's going to say, or your spouse, or your kids. Be courageous. It's going to take courage to follow him for the rest of your days, even unto your death. Father, I pray for those of us sitting here right now who are in the midst of skepticism still, that you would burn away the doubt and let us delight and trust that Jesus died on a cross, taking on the wrath of God, dying for our sin, for us, instead of us, and because of us. But then he didn't stay dead. He rose again to give us life. And we can have life in his name. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will never die. Let us receive that and believe it. Let it put steel in our spine and change everything we are from this day forward. In Jesus' good name we pray. Amen.